What if I told you that the greatest threat to a happy old age isn't wrinkles, illness, or even loneliness? What if the real danger begins decades earlier, hidden inside the choices you make every single day without even realizing it? Most people believe growing older is something that simply happens to them. They think happiness in old age depends on luck, money, or having the right people around them. But one of the most influential psychologists in history, Carl Jung, saw something completely different. He believed that many people don't suffer because they grow old. They suffer because they never truly grow up on the inside. Stay with me, because by the end of this conversation, you'll discover 4 timeless psychological pillars inspired by Jung's philosophy that have the power to transform not only the way you grow older, but the way you live starting today. And the 4th pillar may be the one almost everyone ignores until it's too late. Imagine meeting 2 people who are both 70 years old. One wakes up each morning with quiet gratitude. They have a calm presence, meaningful relationships, and a sense that their life has purpose. The other wakes up feeling bitter, angry, and trapped inside memories they can never change. They constantly complain about the past, fear the future, and secretly wonder where life went wrong. Same age, same number of years. Completely different inner worlds. What created the difference? Most people would say money, health, or family. Those things certainly matter. But Jung believed there was something even deeper shaping the quality of a person's later years. He believed that every human being carries an invisible world within them, and if that world is ignored for decades, it eventually begins demanding attention in painful ways. Think about that for a moment. Many of us spend years building careers, earning money, chasing approval, collecting achievements, and trying to create the perfect image for everyone else to admire. From the outside, life may appear successful. But beneath the surface, another part of us waits patiently, almost silently. Jung called this hidden aspect the shadow. The shadow isn't evil, it isn't something to fear. It's simply the collection of emotions, desires, weaknesses, fears, and even strengths that we've pushed away because we believed they were unacceptable. Maybe you were taught that showing sadness meant weakness. Maybe expressing anger made people reject you. Maybe you learned that asking for help made you a burden. Slowly, piece by piece, you buried parts of yourself. The strange thing is that buried emotions don't disappear. They simply wait. Imagine trying to hold a beach ball underwater. For a few moments, you can keep it beneath the surface, but the harder you push, the more pressure builds. Eventually, it bursts back up with incredible force. Your shadow works in much the same way. The feelings you refuse to acknowledge don't vanish. They influence your choices from behind the scenes. Have you ever overreacted to something small and wondered later, why did I respond like that? Have you ever felt strangely jealous of someone else's success? Have you ever disliked someone instantly without fully understanding why? Sometimes the answer isn't about them. Sometimes it's about a hidden part of yourself asking to be seen. This brings us to the first pillar. The first pillar is self-awareness before self-improvement. Most people spend their lives trying to become someone else. They read books about confidence. They copy successful people. They chase habits that promise happiness. But Jung believed lasting transformation begins with a completely different question. Not, how do I become better? But, who am I beneath the masks I've been wearing? Think about how many roles you've played throughout your life. The responsible employee, the perfect parent, the loyal friend, the strong partner, the person who smiles even when they're falling apart. These roles help us function in society, but they can become dangerous when we forget they're only roles. Jung referred to the social face we present to the world as the persona. The persona isn't fake, it's necessary. But problems begin when your entire identity becomes trapped inside it. Imagine an actor who plays the same character for 30 years and eventually forgets who they are when the cameras stop rolling. It sounds impossible, yet millions of people experience exactly that. They become so focused on pleasing everyone else that they lose contact with themselves. Then one day retirement arrives. The children leave home. The career ends, the applause disappears. Suddenly the question becomes impossible to avoid. If I'm no longer my job, if I'm no longer the role I've always played, then who am I? Many people experience this as a crisis. Jung saw it as an invitation to finally meet the person hiding underneath decades of expectations. And that's where genuine peace begins. Not by becoming someone new, but by remembering the person you stopped listening to years ago. Now here's something fascinating. Have you ever noticed how some elderly people seem incredibly calm, while others become increasingly critical and resentful? Age doesn't automatically create wisdom. It often magnifies whatever has been growing inside all along. If you've spent decades blaming everyone else for your unhappiness, old age rarely changes that pattern. If you've spent decades learning about yourself, accepting your imperfections, and growing emotionally, those habits deepen with time. In other words, old age doesn't create character. It reveals it. Imagine planting two seeds. One receives care, patience, and attention for years. The other is ignored. When harvest season arrives, no one is surprised that the results are different. Your inner life follows the same principle. Every thought you repeat, every emotion you avoid, every truth you refuse to face, you're planting something. And eventually, you'll live among whatever you've grown. That's why Jung warned against living unconsciously. An unconscious life often feels busy, but not meaningful. You chase goals because everyone else is chasing them. You compare yourself to people whose lives you don't actually want. You sacrifice peace for approval. Then years pass faster than you ever imagined. One morning you look in the mirror and wonder where all the time went. The frightening truth isn't that life is short. The frightening truth is how easy it is to sleepwalk through it. So let me ask you something. When was the last time you sat quietly with your own thoughts? Not scrolling through your phone, not distracting yourself with work, not filling every moment with noise, just listening. Because the person you've been avoiding may hold the answers you've been searching for everywhere else. And that leads us toward the second pillar, a principle Jung believed separates people who merely grow older from those who become genuinely wiser with every passing year. And that leads us toward the second pillar, a principle Jung believed separates people who merely grow older from those who become genuinely wiser with every passing year. The second pillar is learning to make peace with change instead of fighting it. One of the greatest illusions people carry is the belief that life is supposed to stay familiar. We become attached to routines, identities, relationships, and even versions of ourselves that no longer exist. Then, when life inevitably changes, we experience that change as a personal attack rather than a natural part of being alive. Think about a tree standing through every season. It doesn't argue with autumn when the leaves begin to fall. It doesn't panic because winter arrives. It doesn't cling desperately to leaves that have already served their purpose. A tree understands something we often forget. Letting go is not the opposite of living, it's part of living. Human beings, however, often resist change with every ounce of their energy. We hold on to old regrets, old victories, old identities, and even old pain because they feel familiar. We tell ourselves stories like, "This is just who I am," or "People never change." But Jung believed that the psyche is always moving, always inviting us to become more whole. The tragedy isn't that life changes. The tragedy is refusing to change with it. Have you ever met someone who still talks about a mistake they made 20 years ago, as if it happened yesterday? Or someone who constantly relives the glory days because they secretly believe the best part of life is already behind them? They are physically living in the present, but psychologically they're trapped somewhere else. The happiest older people rarely have perfect lives. What they often have is the ability to release what no longer belongs to them. They understand that every chapter has a purpose, but no chapter is meant to last forever. Now imagine carrying a suitcase through an airport. At first, it feels manageable, but if you refuse to set it down for hours, your shoulders begin to ache. Eventually, the weight becomes unbearable. The suitcase didn't become heavier. You simply carried it longer than necessary. Resentment works the same way. So does guilt. So does regret. The longer you insist on carrying them, the more they shape your future. Jung once suggested that what we resist often persists. The emotions we refuse to face don't disappear. They simply find another way to express themselves. Sometimes through anxiety. Sometimes through anger. Sometimes through bitterness that slowly poisons our relationships. This brings us to the third pillar, and perhaps the most misunderstood of them all. The third pillar is discovering meaning beyond achievement. Modern society teaches us to measure life through accomplishments. The better job, the larger house, the bigger bank account, the higher social status. We spend decades climbing ladders without asking whether they're leaning against the right wall. Achievement is not the enemy, but achievement without meaning leaves an emptiness that success alone can never fill. Have you noticed how some people achieve everything they once dreamed about, only to admit they still feel lost? That's because the human soul isn't satisfied by accomplishment alone. It longs for purpose, connection, creativity, and authenticity. Jung believed that the second half of life invites us to shift our attention. Instead of asking, "How much can I accumulate?" we begin asking, "What kind of person am I becoming?" That question changes everything. It changes how you treat strangers. It changes how you speak to your family. It changes what you prioritize when no one is watching. And perhaps most importantly, it changes the way you relate to yourself. Because if your entire identity depends on external success, what happens when success fades? What happens when retirement comes? What happens when applause stops? The people who thrive in old age are rarely those who built the biggest careers. More often, they're the ones who built the richest inner lives. They never stopped learning. They never stop wondering. They never stop growing. And that's why age became their greatest teacher instead of their greatest fear, which brings us to the fourth and final pillar, the one many people ignore until life forces them to pay attention. The fourth pillar is accepting yourself as a work in progress. Perfection is a prison. The more desperately you chase it, the more impossible it becomes to enjoy your own life. Think about the people you admire most. Are they perfect? Probably not. They're human. They've failed. They've been misunderstood. They've made painful mistakes. But somewhere along the way, they stopped measuring their worth by perfection and started measuring it by growth. Jung believed that becoming whole doesn't mean becoming flawless. It means accepting both your strengths and your weaknesses without allowing either one to define you completely. That's true freedom. Because once you stop pretending to be perfect, you stop fearing that someone will discover you're human. Imagine how much energy people spend every day trying to maintain an image, trying to appear stronger than they feel, smarter than they are, happier than they really are. What if all that energy were invested in genuine growth instead? How different would life look? How different would your relationships become? The remarkable thing about old age isn't the number of years you've lived. It's the opportunity those years give you to finally stop performing and start living authentically. At the end of life, very few people wish they had impressed more strangers. Very few wish they had argued more often. Very few wish they had spent more time proving themselves. Instead, they wish they had loved more deeply, forgiven more freely, laughed more often, and listened more carefully to the quiet voice inside that always knew what truly mattered. So before you leave today, I want to ask you one final question. If you continue thinking exactly as you do now for the next 20 years, where will those thoughts lead you? Because every belief you repeat becomes a habit, every habit becomes a lifestyle, and every lifestyle quietly becomes your destiny. Perhaps growing older isn't something to fear after all. Perhaps the real question is whether you'll spend the years ahead collecting possessions or collecting wisdom. Because time will pass either way. The only choice left is deciding who you'll become while it does.